Hello, dear students. In this lecture, we will be talking about David Malouf's Revolving Days. Now, Revolving Days is a poem which occurs in Malouf's collection entitled Typewriter Music. Now, Revolving Days is a very interesting poem because it talks about love, the loss of love, and a wishful thinking which connects the love and the loss. Now, when we are talking about David Malouf, and I'm not going into his biography, I would directly go into the poem. And you see, the poem is divided into three stanzas. The first stanza is the past, that which happened. The second stanza deals with a kind of. Okay, let's first go into the first stanza, and as we progress, we shall go into each stanza and what they represent. So, in the first stanza, David Malouf, or the speaker, begins in this manner. That year, I had nowhere to go. I fell in love. A mistake, of course, but it lasted and has lasted. So, look, in a very, very self exploratory way, and in a very, very, what should I call it, in a very self mocking way, the speaker says that year, that is one specific year, he did not have anything else to do. So he fell in love. Now, as if he justifies the action of falling in love with kind of joblessness. So he suggests that because he did not have anything else to do, so he fell in love. You see, what happens is when such self-explorations and such self-ruminations happen at a later date, they often entail a kind of self-relegation, a kind of self-negation. And via that, Malouf, or the speaker over here, arrives at the understanding that at that given year, since he did not have anything else to do, he fell in love. But look, over here, there is a very interesting way of putting it. If you focus on the punctuation marks, then you can see that he is presenting the argument in a very interesting way. That is, he says, that year I had nowhere to go. Therefore, love is a place that you go to. You see, a person is always a home. A special person is always a home. And therefore, he says that since I had nowhere to go, so I went to love. So, as if love is a spatial concept which is located in his psychological topography, and the speaker or the poet explores this psychological topography via rumination, via pondering. And then look, he says, I fell in love, then there is a dash. As if he wants you to pause and participate in your own reactions towards your love, the love which has stayed. And he wishes you to pause and to ponder, to pause and to participate in his experience of love. And he says that I fell in love. A mistake, of course, but it lasted and has lasted. So he agrees that falling in love for him was a mistake. You see, from the very beginning, the speaker over here appears to be a very introvert person, and this person judges, or this person tries to explore his own mental condition, his own psychological being, in terms of his own actions. And therefore he says that a mistake, of course. Why was it a mistake? That we will come towards as we read the entire poem. It is a mistake on multiple levels. Because you see, if you love and you cannot explore your love, if you cannot expose your love, and if you cannot actually work on your love, then love is perhaps a mistake. Because you see, one sided love does not lead you to anywhere. And therefore, he says a mistake, of course, but it lasted and has lasted. Now, he wonders that if it was a mistake, can a mistake last and keep on lasting for a person's entire life? That is a question that Malouf wants us to pause and ponder over. Now, it was perhaps a mistake because he could not spill the beans, he could not reciprocate, he could not uh, tell the beloved that he loved her. That was a mistake. Secondly, a person like him who suffers from a kind of introverted nature where he cannot communicate with others, the inherent feelings within his heart, for such people, it often appears that love is a mistake because they cannot quite communicate the feelings that are in their heart. So it is a scathing self uh, assessment which the poet or the speaker goes through. The old tug at the heart, the grace unasked for, urgencies that boom under the pocket of a shirt. Look how interestingly he keeps on talking about himself, but simultaneously he keeps on evading himself because he does not wish to expose himself, he does not wish to come out to the society, talking about himself in very open and very candid terms. And therefore, he kind of tries to escape the consciousness that he is talking about himself. And he keeps on talking in uh, kind of word juggleries, kind of linguistic acrobatics, which he employs to talk about his own mental being, his own psychological condition. And look what he says: the old tug at the heart. Now, when you are in love, you feel a longing towards the other person. Excuse me. And it is this longing, this tug at the heart, which he cannot evade. So, what he does is he simply generalizes his own experiences and proposes them to be a universal phenomenon. And look what he says: the old tug at the heart. So, he still aches for the lady, he still longs for the lady, the grace unasked for. Now, there can be two interpretations over here, according to me. One is that the lady graced him by at least being around him. That is one thing, the grace unasked for. Perhaps she saw him as a good friend. Or the second interpretation can be that he simply fell in love with the lady, and that fact itself, the fact of love, that he felt love towards someone else, is a grace in itself. So the grace unasked for, urgencies that boom under the pocket of a shirt. When you fall in love, one thing becomes very common. That is, you feel an urgent need, a necessity, a deep necessity to communicate with that person, to be around that person, to be in a uh, on end of touch with that person. And it is this desire of communication which comes from the heart. And incidentally, coincidentally, if you are a man or a person who's wearing a shirt, then you have a pocket, and the heart is right underneath the pocket. And look how he simply talks about the heart in very evasive terms, as if the exploration of love for an introvert person is an act of evasion from the self. Now, here I would like to draw your attention to one of the early modern writers, early modernist writers, sorry, whose name is T.S. Eliot, Thomas Stearns Eliot. Now, Eliot, in his famous essay Tradition and the Individual Talent, which was published in 1919 in The Egoist and later in 1920 in The Sacred Wood, in this essay, T.S. Eliot talks about poetry being not an expression of emotion, but rather an escape from emotion. Imagine if I love a person and I feel certain specific emotions towards that person. Now, those specific emotions are specific to me. But when I'm talking about emotions in general, or I'm talking about love in general, say I'm talking to you. Now, you might think that, okay, I have experienced love in a very different way. But you see, the rudiments, they remain the same. If the rudiments remain the same, and I simply do not talk about the emotions in very uh, specific terms and I generalize them, it is not an expression of emotion but an escape from emotion. However, Eliot makes a very critical point. He says that only those who have emotion know what it means to escape them. And over here, we see that the poet or the speaker is very, very open about his emotional perspective about his beloved. And therefore, he says, urgencies that boom under the pocket of a shirt. So, the urgencies of the heart that boom kind of explode under the pocket of a shirt. If you are actually in love, no matter how much you try, you would not be able to control it. When you see that person next to you, now that is a given reality. However, there are certain other issues over here as well. When Malouf writes, we can understand that he talks about love in a little bit of capitalistic terms as well. Now, this is something that I am tracing in the poem. Okay, I haven't found much about it in any of the books that I have read on Malouf. But uh, you can agree with me, you can reject my ideas, but just listen to them. You see, this poem is written in the early 2000s. And we see that there are a lot of references to shirts of different colors as well. And there are references to buying, as if the speaker wants to buy newer clothing, he wants to don newer clothing to kind of have a different kind of identity. Now, we live in an era of advertisements. Now, when we are living in an era of advertising, our identity to a great deal is constructed by how we perform ourselves. Let me just discuss it a bit and it will be very, very clear to you. Imagine I'm wearing a Van Heusen shirt, Levi's jeans, or maybe some Versace. I'm wearing some shoe, maybe which is, say, Red Chief or something like that. So that is very expensive product. Say maybe I'm wearing a watch by Rolex or by Rado. Maybe I'm wearing a Ray-Ban sunglass. That talks about my class. That talks about my identity. We often judge people by the kind of clothes they wear, by the kind of accessories that they wear. Coincidentally, one of the professors at Calcutta University, um, Professor Dipendu Chakraborty, wrote a very interesting essay in the later half of the 20th century, and the essay was entitled Poshakir Rajniti, Politics of Clothing. And if you see that here, the poet or the speaker tries to don on newer identities by buying new shirts, And it is this culture of buying, of changing oneself through materialistic ideas and images, that is what leads me to a kind of capitalistic understanding of love as well. You see, this, you do not find many traces of it in the poem, but there are a few traces. Let me just trace them. Let me just kind of link the dots for you. Something very common happens when we fall in love. That is, we tend to deal with love in very emotional terms. But there is another paradigm to love as well. And that paradigm is the paradigm of money, the monetary aspect of love. You see, love does not fill your belly, money does. Goods too, materialistic things too. You need to buy food, you need to buy clothing, you need to have a shelter, you need to have a security, and so on and so forth. That's the reality of present day society. That has been the reality since the early times of capitalistic market. Now, in a capitalistic society, in a capitalist society, what happens is that when we think of love, we need to think of love in terms of money, security, fooding, clothing, and the basic necessities at least, and the basic luxuries of life, rather than simply thinking about love in very emotional terms. If we think about love in simple emotional terms, we are actually betraying ourselves. And it is this consciousness that is somewhere laden underneath the apparent meaning of this poem. Uh, if you are a Bengali like me, you perhaps have heard one very interesting song by Anjan Dotto, Belabos, where there's a lover and he calls up his girlfriend, his love, and he says that চাকরিটা আমি পেয়ে গেছি বেলা শুনছো, এখন আর কেউ আটকাতে পারবে না, সম্বন্ধটা এইবার তুমি ভেস্তে দিতে পারো, মাকে বলে দাও বিয়ে তুমি করছো না. So it is the old lover who calls his beloved and he says that I have got the job, and you tell your family members not to look for new matches for you, not to look for new grooms for you. And then the lady is silent on the other side of the phone, on the other end of the phone. And then suddenly he goes on talking about his job prospects and how he wants to have a very colorful family with her in this black and white city. But then soon he realizes that the lady is weeping. And at once the listener is made aware that perhaps she is married. Perhaps she could no longer wait for him. And you see, when we think about love in terms of reality, in today's world at least, we cannot simply let go of the feeling that emotions do not feed our bellies, emotions do not fulfill our bellies, emotions do not allow us the luxury of life in a modern day society. Now, when we take into consideration all of these things, and when he refers to the pocket of a shirt, the pocket is essentially where we carry our money. So the references, although are very vague, but they are there nonetheless. And this is what I want to hammer home to you, that do not simply read Revolving Days as those love poems of those Elizabethan age and those romantic love poems where maybe a lover is comparing, your eyes look like this, your hand looks like this, your skin looks like this, so on and so forth. So these are not those considerations. With changing time, the considerations also change. The paradigms change, the equations change between the lover and the beloved. And therefore, we have to take into consideration each and every aspect that love offers. Now, look, he says, what I remember is the color of the shirts. I had bought them as an experiment in ways of seeing myself. Now, look, he says, what I remember is the color of the shirts. So instead of remembering how he spent time with her, he remembers the colors of the shirts that he bought. Now, with this reference, I believe that the poet is referring to the uh, monetary aspect. That is, the materialistic things remain. Say, if a person is no longer with you, maybe physically, say, you were in a relationship, you suffered a breakup, and that person is no longer with you. But the gifts that that person gave you, they still remain. And whenever you come across those gifts, whenever you come across the places where you used to meet, suddenly you are reminded of that person. And look, he has only those shirts to remember that person by. But not just that. These shirts remind him that he once bought them. And there was an ulterior motive behind buying these shirts. So this is not as simple as it looks. I had bought them as an experiment in ways of seeing myself, hoping to catch in a window as I passed what I was to be in my new life as lover. So look, if you remember that famous dialogue by Shakespeare in As You Like It, all the world's a stage and we are the players, excuse me. So then you realize that in each relationship that we commit ourselves to, whether be it with our parents, with our friends, with our siblings, with our significant other, we are playing different roles. None of those roles is actually what we are, but they are versions, variegated versions of the people that we are. Now, therefore, he bought those shirts so that he could look at a window, at a shop window, that how would he look as a lover. So he's trying to don a new role. Remember Macbeth's dialogue, why do you dress me in borrowed robes? But he is buying these borrowed robes to find himself in newer hues, in newer shades. And now he focuses on having the shade of a lover. How would he look as a lover in his new life as a lover? And this is an experiment, a social experiment kind of. Therefore, you see why I was talking about that paradigm of capitalism when I was talking about the lover over here. And look, he says, in ways of seeing myself. So it was his own way of seeing the version of the lover which was within him. And it was his way of seeing how does he look as a lover. And therefore this becomes very, very interesting. Because of the fact that he could not be the lover, because she did not accept him as the lover. Perhaps she didn't even know. But he was trying to don the role of the lover in this one-sided relationship. Now, when such formulations come to the forefront, these make the poem very problematic. Because you see, there is no communication with the other, but there are communicational channels with the self. And it is as if the self talking to the other selves. And in this communication of the self with the selves that we are, we explore the kind of hopelessness, the kind of helplessness that the lover suffers from. one mint green, one pink, and the third called ivy leaf, tan with darker stripes. My first button down collar. So look, he bought one mint green, one pink, and the other of ivy color and striped button down collar shirt. Now, you see the color symbolism is also very important because you see green speaks about vivacity, green speaks about life, and mint green especially has other significances of freshness, of confidence, of soothing attitude. On the other hand, pink talks about emotion. Pink is a very soft yet very bright color. It talks about emotionality. It talks about one's own uh, emotional temper. An ivy colored striped shirt, these were ivy is a specific flower plant, and this color is very soothing yet very beautiful. But the striped shirt with the collar down, these were primarily worn by the polo players. And look, he is embarking into something very fashionable. And he wants to see himself in these different hues, in these different colors, in these different masks. So when your clothes become your masks, you don on newer masks every day. And therefore, this becomes very, very important for us to take into consideration that in this first stanza, he talks about the past as he remembers it right now. In the second stanza, we have a very wishful thinking. You know, sometimes all of us do this. That is when we are alone, we do not have any work, and we think that what our lives could have been had we made some different choices. And the speaker over here does the same. Look, he says, we never write, but sometimes knotting my tie at a mirror, one of those selves I had expected steps into the room. So he says that they have severed all forms of communication. They never write. Now you know this is a very interesting thing. Imagine up till the first half or even the second half of the 20th century, if you read about any poet, any author, any writer, you'll see that they have volumes of collected letters which they wrote to their friends or perhaps which their friends wrote to them, and there was a communication via letters. So writing was a part of their habit, writing was the part of their life, not just creative writing but communicative writing as well. But now, with all these WhatsApp, all these newer forms of communication, that art of writing a letter is lost. And he says that we never write. Now, you see, uh, this might sound silly, but it's true. We have heard about love letters. We have never heard about love WhatsApp or love DM. We never hear about it. We do not hear about love messenger chat. We do not hear about love WhatsApp chat. We do not hear about love Telegram chat or love anything other else. Basically, we have love letters. Why? Because a letter gives you that avenue, that oblique composite space where you can be yourself, where you can express yourself over pages. So, writing a letter is an art. And he says that we never write. You know, when you write, it's not just simple explication of your emotions, it's much more than that. When you write, it's a kind of neutral space. Like, for instance, if I write, I eat rice, and you read it. Who is this I right now? Is it me or is it you? Because I is a function of language, nothing else. So communication happens on a very different level when we are writing a letter. And therefore, the speaker says we never write. There is no communication. There is a linguistic silence in between them. There is a communicative silence in between them. And in this silence, in this zone of silence, he weaves his own wishful thinking. He weaves a different reality in this neutral, composite, oblique zone of silence. But sometimes, knotting my tie at a mirror, one of those selves I expected steps into the room. Now, knotting my tie has two meanings. One is the literal meaning of wearing a tie, and the other is the marital knot. So, knotting my tie with you, when I'm at the mirror and I imagine that if I had knotted my tie with you, then one of those selves wearing those shirts, maybe a mint green, maybe a pink, maybe a ivy checkered shirt, steps into the room. And the room is the psychological topography. This is the room. Your mind, it's a room. Therefore, it becomes very interesting. In the next room, you are waiting. We have not yet taken back the life we promised to pour into each other's mouths forever and forever, while I choose between changes to surprise you. So then he imagines it, he takes his imagination a step further. And he says that you are waiting in the next room, in the adjacent room, and they are together in the vow of living through joy and through sickness, till death do them apart. So they are tied by the marital vows. So, and then they have kissed. That is, look, he says, the life we promise to pour into each other's mouths forever and forever. Like in a Christian marriage, they ask you to exchange the vows, and then they say that do you take him to be your lawfully wedded husband, to accept him in sickness and in health till death do you part, and they say I do. And then the priest says that now you may kiss the bride. And this entire enactment of the marriage takes place in his mental world. And he says that now I wish, in my wishful thinking, we are married together and you are waiting for me while I surprise you by changing from one aspect, that is either from the mint green aspect to the pink aspect, or from the pink aspect to the ivy checkered aspect, or maybe from the ivy checkered to the green. So look how he shifts from image to image, how he shifts from one thought to another, how he shifts from past to a wishful future or to a wishful present. So you see, there is a triple shift in the self, shift in the time frame, shift in the real and the imaginary. And therefore, Revolving Days becomes very important and very difficult as a poem. Then he says, Revolving Days, my heart in my mouth again. I'm waiting, I'm writing this for you, wherever you are. Whoever is staring into your blue eyes, it is me. I'm still here. Do you imagine sometimes that how time is flying, time is changing, but nothing changes on a daily basis? We take each day as it comes. But how at the end of a year, or how at the end of a month, we have changed so much. So the revolving days go on with the same drudgery, with the same monotony. But how these revolving days make so small changes that we absolutely change as people over time. My heart in my mouth again, as if he's speaking his heart once again, as he's writing another letter for her, wherever she is, and with whomever she is, no matter who is staring into her blue eyes. He wants her to know that he's still there. Maybe she has moved on, but he is still stuck in her memories. Now, here we find a very interesting thing, which is called the magic circle of memory. What is a magic circle of memory? Just look at my fingers. Okay, just look at my fingers. Imagine this is the past, which has already happened. And this is a future which you wish to take place, but in the present, this is the present. So, this is the past, something has happened. This is the present where that thing is no more. And you wish to have it somewhere in the future. Connect the dots, you have half a circle, right? So, this is called the magic circle of memory. At the present time, you are thinking about a past and wishing that it would take place again in the future. This is called the magic circle of memory. So the speaker kind of suffers from or goes through a magic circle of memory, and he talks about it and he says that I am still here. So he claims that he has not changed at all. He claims that he is still here. No, don't worry, I won't appear out of that old time to discomfort you. But he realizes that he has missed the train. Those times are bygone. So he says that let bygones be bygones. But this is his way of arriving at himself by letting go of that stifling feeling that he could not tell her for his life how he felt for her. So he makes it very clear that he is not here to cause any discomfort to her. He is not here to disturb her. He is just here to let her know that what he actually feels deep within his heart. And look, he says, and no, at this distance, I am not holding my breath for a reply. Now, over here, distance does not mean spatial distance, it means temporal distance. That is, after such a long time, I'm not waiting for a reply, I'm not holding my breath for a reply, I'm not pinning my hopes for a reply. It's just that I'm trying to arrive at myself. I'm trying for the first time in my life to come clear that yes, I finally told you how I actually felt about you and how I actually feel about you. So, Revolving Days is actually a poem about unrequited love. But much more than that, it is a combination of love, the love unexpressed, the love unexplored, the love which is lost, the lover who is still stuck there, and the final desire to convey to the lady that he loved her. And via this confession, it is a confessional poem. Via this confession, the lover wishes to kind of arrive at a catharsis where he would finally be able to let go of that stifling feeling of having loved and never having the courage to speak for his love, to express his love. So the lover, unlike an Eliotesque prufrock, dares for the first time to disturb the universe. But he realizes that sometimes, unlike Prufrock, he realizes that sometimes, although disturbing the universe is not worth it, and therefore a Prufrock would not disturb the universe, but Malouf's lover realizes that sometimes disturbing the universe for the sake of the self is fine. So, with this, we end this discussion. Thank you for listening to me and hope to see you again in some other lecture. Okay, have a good day.